I was halfway through passing the gravy when my father turned to me and said, "You're a guest, Ellie. Let the real family decide." The room went quiet for a second, then Savannah laughed. Brody smirked. My stepmother sipped her wine like she hadn't heard a thing. I froze, spoon in hand, smile stitched in place. We were discussing a legacy vacation to honour Grandpa Carter's memory, his ashes to be scattered on the cliffs of Big Sur, just like he'd asked. I'd said, I'd love to help plan it. That's when my father dropped that sentence like a gavel. Guest, not daughter, not family, just a guest. I nodded, as I always did, but something inside me stopped nodding. Something began standing up, and by the time dessert was served, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Have you ever been treated like a stranger at your own family table? Let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true inspired revenge stories. My name is Ellie Carter. I'm 30 years old, and I've spent most of my life walking the blurry line between family and outsider. When I was 8, my mother passed away after a sudden illness. A year later, my father, Ron, married Julia, a woman with a bright smile and a sharper tone. Within 2 years, I had 2 half-siblings, Savannah and Brody, a new family unit, a new photo on the mantel, and somehow I was always standing just a little too far to the side. Growing up, I lived between the pages of library books. They made more sense than the world around me. After college, I stayed local and took a job as a children's librarian. I rent a tiny one-bedroom apartment above a bookstore. It's quiet, safe, mine. When Grandpa Carter, my dad's father, fell ill, I was the only one who stepped in. I bathed him. I read him the morning paper when his eyes got too weak to focus. I held his hand the night he died. Savannah said hospitals made her nauseous. Brody was too busy with work. Dad visited occasionally, but in the end, it was just me and Grandpa, and a silence filled with everything no one else bothered to say. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would mean something, that someone had noticed. So when Dad announced a Carter family legacy trip at last year's Thanksgiving, I felt a flicker of hope. He said we'd honour Grandpa's memory together, said the family would visit Big Sur, where Grandpa used to hike when he was young. The trust fund Grandpa left would cover everything. A tribute, Dad called it. That night, I stayed up researching flights, routes, landmarks Grandpa loved. I even thought of offering to help plan. But when I finally spoke up this Thanksgiving, when I said, I'd love to help, he didn't even look at me. "You're a guest, Ellie," and just like that, the flicker went out, but only for a moment. Because while they laughed and passed the cranberry sauce, I remembered something they didn't. Something Grandpa had left behind, something only I controlled. This wasn't the first time, not even close. The truth is, I've spent years learning to shrink myself, to soften the sharp edges of my presence, just to fit into a family that never really made room for me. When I turned 25, I baked my own birthday cake and ate it in the break room at the library. No card, no call. Later that night, I saw photos on Savannah's Instagram. My dad, my stepmother, Brody, and her, celebrating a wine and cheese night at the house. The same night, the year I got promoted to head librarian, I invited everyone to a small celebration. No one came. Savannah texted, "Ugh, sorry babe, it's just so far. Rain check." Brody forgot completely. My dad said, "Why would we go to a work thing? That's not really a family milestone, is it? I should have learned then, but I didn't." Not really, because when you grow up wanting so badly to be included, you learn to take whatever scraps people hand you and pretend they're enough. Savannah, with her blowouts and curated selfies, always seemed to glide through family dinners like royalty. She once brought a $12 bottle of Pinot Grigio and got called so thoughtful for days. I brought my famous rosemary rolls, made from scratch, and ended up alone in the kitchen scraping gravy off plates, while she live-tweeted compliments. Brody once asked me for a $2,000 loan to help him cover moving costs. I wired it the same day. 6 months later, I asked gently if he had a timeline to repay. He looked at me like I'd just betrayed him. Dad jumped in, annoyed. That's what family does, Ellie. We help each other out. Funny how helping each other never seemed to go both ways, but nothing cut deeper than the phrase Dad used a few years ago when I asked why I was always treated differently. He leaned back in his recliner, beer in hand, and said with a sigh, "You were born in grief, Ellie. That's why you're always so intense." As if my mother dying was something I carried like a stain. As if I was the problem for feeling too much. So this year, when Savannah laid out her printed itinerary for the legacy vacation, colour-coded with excursions, spa packages, and private transportation, I should have expected it. I wasn't on the planning board. I wasn't even part of the conversation. "Ellie," she said sweetly, not looking up from her iPad. "Could you maybe bring the pumpkin pie out next?" Brody chimed in. "And grab more sparkling water from the fridge, if you don't mind." Dad added, "Make sure Grandma's photo album doesn't get knocked over. It's the only one we're bringing to Big Sur." The only one. And I already knew it didn't include a single picture of me. They moved on quickly, talking about hotel upgrades and whether they should charter a private car from the airport. And that's when the phrase landed, like a fist wrapped in velvet. "You're a guest, Ellie." "Let the real family decide." I nodded. I smiled. I cleared the table, but I didn't forget, that night, while the dishwasher hummed and Savannah posted her Ormar grateful selfie with a wine glass in hand, I sat alone on the back porch. It was cold, but I didn't feel it. What I felt was sharper, older, like a truth that had waited too long. And somewhere in the dark, Grandpa's voice returned to me, clear, strong. The Carter legacy isn't about photos or vacations. It's about who shows up when no one else does. And suddenly, I wasn't hurt anymore. I was ready. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was sad, because I was wide awake, with clarity. There's a certain kind of silence that follows humiliation. At first it chokes you, but then it sharpens. And in that quiet, I remembered something no one else did. 3 months before Grandpa Carter passed, he called me into his room while everyone else was downstairs watching football. He was thin then, bones like twigs wrapped in tissue paper. But his voice still had that quiet authority. "You're the only one who shows up, Ellie," he said, reaching for a legal envelope. "I want you to handle things when I'm gone. Not your dad. Not that circus he calls a family." Inside was a notarized amendment. I was the executor of his living trust. It wasn't just symbolic, it gave me control. At the time I thought it was sweet, meaningful, but not useful. Grandpa passed away 6 weeks later and no one asked about the trust. Dad assumed he had access to the funds and I didn't correct him until now. I opened my laptop the next morning and logged into the trust portal. There it was, Carter Family Memorial Fund, $76,482.11, and beneath it, the pending withdrawal request dated last Tuesday, a $22,000 transfer to Carter Legacy Travel, marked as final payment, Big Sur trip. Savannah must have submitted it, probably used Dad's credentials, but she didn't know one thing. The portal wasn't just for record keeping, it required final sign-off from the executor before funds could be dispersed. And I had never signed off. Instead, I clicked Hold Disbursement. Then I opened a new tab. By noon, I drafted a redirect request with the Trust's law firm, authorizing a temporary freeze under the clause. Requires majority beneficiary agreement in cases of discretionary travel. It was a clause Grandpa himself had insisted on, knowing how easily legacy could be twisted into luxury. That night I visited the library alone after hours. I walked past the shelves Grandpa used to volunteer at. He loved reading programs, especially for underserved teens. Said that was the real legacy. Kids who learn how to think for themselves. So I submitted a grant proposal in his name, transferring $15,000 from the trust into a literacy endowment, the Carter Initiative for Rural Readers. It felt right. No fireworks, no fanfare. Just balance. Just justice. The next morning, I cancelled the hotel block, then the spa package, then the charter shuttle from SFO. I didn't delete anything, just paused, reversed, reassigned. I didn't do it in anger, I did it with precision. Piece by piece, the Carter Legacy vacation unravelled. By Friday, Savannah would receive a compliance notification from the law firm. Trip funding has been suspended pending revised authorization. Contact executor for clarification. I scheduled the email to send at 8 a.m. sharp, and when it did, I was already in the car, headed north to Grandpa's cabin in Vermont. A place no one else ever bothered to remember existed. 4. Rising Action, Part 2 of 2. I arrived at the cabin just after sunset. The gravel cracked under my tires and the air smelled like pine and wood smoke. Sharp, clean, nothing like Boston. Grandpa's old cabin sat just off a winding trail, tucked between 2 fir trees and a frozen creek. He used to call it our little nowhere. I unlocked the door. Inside, everything was just as he'd left it. A little dusty, a little creaky, but safe. Mine. I lit the old fireplace, made a cup of tea, and sat by the window as the sky turned deep blue. I was alone, and finally, at peace. Then my phone buzzed, and buzzed again. By the time I picked it up, the screen was filled with notifications. Family group chat. 17 messages. Savannah. What is this compliance thing? The trip funds are frozen. Dad. Who authorized a hold on the trust? This better be a mistake. Mom, Julia. I thought the executor was Ron. Brody. Ellie, you didn't, right? Savannah again. Tell me this isn't your way of acting out because of what Dad said at dinner. That one made me laugh. Acting out? No, this was acting in. Reclaiming something no one had ever thought I deserved. At 9:43 p.m. I replied with a single text. I recommend contacting the trust attorney. Everything is being handled properly. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then silence. For the next 2 days, I kept my phone on silent. I hiked, I read, I made pancakes from Grandpa's recipe card, the one in his crooked handwriting that said, "Double the butter, trust me." When I checked my email again, there were more messages, some frantic, some furious. Final payment for Carter family legacy trip, cancelled hotel block request, voided transportation refund in process, and then the one I'd been waiting for, from the trust firm, subject, authorization executed, funds redistributed per executor directive, legacy trip formally suspended. That was the moment. Not loud, not cinematic, just complete. I stared at the screen, a slow smile spreading across my face. I hadn't screamed, I hadn't begged, I hadn't tried to prove my worth one more time. I had simply decided if I wasn't real family, then I owed them nothing. They called a family meeting for Sunday afternoon. Ron's house, of course. Where else? The same home where I'd eaten on fold-out chairs at Christmas. The same kitchen where I'd been told to just be grateful you're included. I showed up 5 minutes early. Not because I was eager, but because I knew they expected me to be late. Let them feel unprepared. The front door opened before I even knocked. Ron stood there, arms crossed, jaw tight. "So, you do remember where we live?" I didn't reply. Just walked past him and into the living room. Savannah was already seated, legs crossed, eyes cold. Julia hovered nearby with 2 glasses of water. Brody stood awkwardly in the corner, hands in his jacket pockets. No one offered me a seat. I didn't need one. Ellie, Ron started, what you did, that was theft. You sabotaged your own family's vacation. Do you have any idea how much you've cost us? I looked him in the eye, voice steady. You told me I wasn't part of the family, so I behaved accordingly. There was a pause, brief but heavy. Savannah broke it with a scoff. Oh my God, this is because of Thanksgiving, isn't it? That's insane. You've always hated us. I turned toward her slowly. I never hated you, Savannah. I wanted to be loved by you. That's a very different thing. Her eyes darted away, jaw clenched. She wasn't used to honesty, especially not when it came so quietly. Ron stepped forward louder now. Your grandfather's trust wasn't meant for this. You twisted it for your own gain. No, I said. You assumed you controlled it. Grandpa chose me for a reason. He knew I wouldn't let the money become a spa retreat. He wanted a legacy, not a luxury. This wasn't your call, Savannah snapped. But it was, I said. Legally, morally, historically. I was the only one there when he passed. I held his hand while you booked brunch reservations. Silence. Then Brody spoke low and careful. She's right. Everyone turned. She's not wrong about any of it, he said. We've treated her like a placeholder for years. I borrowed money and never paid her back. I showed up when it was easy. She showed up when it mattered. Ron's voice dropped to a growl. You're siding with her? I'm siding with the truth, Brody replied. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. I just straightened my coat. I didn't come here for a fight. I came because you asked me to. But if this was supposed to be a shaming, it's not going to work. Not anymore. Savannah rolled her eyes. God, you're so dramatic. I smiled, just slightly. No, I'm just done being quiet. Julia stepped forward, voice trembling. Ellie, maybe we all said things we didn't mean. Can't we just... I held up a hand. I'm not here to patch things up. I'm here to say this, clearly, once. I will no longer beg for a seat at this table. If I'm a guest, then I have no obligation to stay. Ron's face went red. He pointed at the door. If you walk out now, Ellie, don't expect to be welcomed back. That's the first honest thing you've said in years, I replied. I turned, and that's when Brody stepped forward again. Ellie, wait. I stopped, hand on the doorknob. You were right, he said, about everything, and I'm sorry. I should have said it a long time ago. I looked back at him. He looked small, regretful, real. Thanks, I said softly, and then I opened the door. Behind me the house filled with raised voices again, the same cycles, the same noise. But this time I wasn't part of it. I stepped outside, and for the first time in my life, didn't look back. The snow had started to fall by the time I returned to Vermont. Not heavy, not loud, just soft flurries brushing the windows like a breath against glass. The world was quiet again, and so was I. I stayed at Grandpa's cabin through December. No phone calls, no family, no apologies. Just the kind of silence that doesn't scream, it heals. By January, I'd finalised the paperwork for the Carter Initiative for Rural Readers, a youth literacy programme serving 3 counties. We held weekly reading circles, book drives, even brought in guest authors over Zoom. The funds from the trust weren't being spent, they were being planted. Brody showed up the second weekend, no fanfare, no grand gesture. Just knocked on the cabin door with a bag of groceries and said, You'll need help if this thing keeps growing. He started helping with event logistics, book sorting, driving the van to pick up donations. One morning, after stacking chairs for a reading day, he said, You know, I think Grandpa would have liked this more than a beach trip. I didn't answer, I just handed him another box. Dad never called, but he did send one email. Hope you're well, not sure what happens next, but I guess you made your choice. No greeting, no closing, just cold punctuation, as always. Savannah, of course, chose Instagram. She posted a filtered picture of her crying over a candle with the caption, "Sometimes family cuts you deeper than enemies. Schon healing, letting go." The comments were exactly what you'd expect. "Stay strong, Queen. Your heart's too big. They don't deserve you." I didn't reply. I didn't even flinch. Then, one Friday morning, a thick envelope arrived from Grandpa's law firm. I opened it slowly, expecting documents, but inside was a single-page letter, dated 4 days before he passed. His handwriting was shaky, but still legible. "Ellie, if you're reading this, then I've moved on to the next chapter. I want you to know, whatever choice you've made with this trust, I trust you. Not because you're perfect, but because you show up. You've honoured my trust, not just the legal one, but the moral one. And that means everything to me. Grandpa." I sat down right there on the porch steps, snow melting against my boots, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I cried. Not out of pain, but because something inside me had finally let go. Not of them, of needing them. Have you ever been told you didn't belong by your own blood? Have you ever walked away not out of weakness, but because staying meant losing yourself? Sometimes revenge isn't loud. It isn't fire or fury. It's silence, boundaries, choosing peace over approval, choosing yourself. Ellie didn't destroy her family. She simply stopped letting them destroy her. And in doing so, she honoured the legacy of someone who truly saw her. If you've ever taken the quiet road, if you've ever let justice speak for you when words fell short, share your story in the comments. Let others know they're not alone. And if Ellie's journey stayed with you, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because here on Whispers of Revenge, we believe sometimes the coldest revenge is simply not needing them anymore.